Hello, welcome to Cast of Wonders, the fiction audio magazine for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. I'm Graham Dunlop. Today we present The Unicorn Tree by Alethea Kontis. Alethea is an author and editor who lives in Ashburn, Virginia. She is the author of Alpha Oops, The Day Zed Went First, described as an alphabet book with attitude, and many other books and short stories. You can find out more about Alethea and her work, for example, the fact that she's half French and half Greek, at aletheakontis.com. Check the show notes for the link. It's narrated by Marguerite Kenner. By day, Marguerite is an executive admin for a large intellectual property law firm. By night, she's an avenging hero with superpowers such as rock climbing, aikido, music, she's a classical percussionist, gaming, sewing costumes, and reading anything and everything. You can find out what's on her mind at projectvalkyrie.wordpress.com. And now, we've a tale to tell.
The Unicorn Tree by Alethea Kontis. Whoa! Hello there! Katie stared into the barrel of the gun and the 10-year-old's eyes beyond it, and wondered what mess she had gotten herself into this time. He and his scraggly, heavily armed gang of street rats might have been a hallucination, like the unicorn that had danced before her back when she had visited this world as a child. Industrial City had been standing then, streets where streets should be and buildings where buildings should be, and the air had tasted of coal dust and honey cakes. It wasn't this scattered, shattered landscape with its acrid tang of gasoline and ash, an unfortunate side effect of Armageddon. Her mother was a freedom fighter, her father a lifelong firearms engineer. In a perfect world, Katie would have known how to disable the hand cannon long enough to wrest it from her captor. Unfortunately, this was a destroyed planet in the armpit of the galaxy, and Katie, artist in disappointment, was far from perfect. "My name is Katie." Her stomach rolled. Talking hurt. Dissent always gave her a migraine. The 10-year-old, his rain-cloud gray eyes glowing in his soot-covered face, knew far more about handling that gun than a woman used to holding paintbrushes. She tried to drag to surface ancient memories of firing similar weaponry, and failed miserably. 12 children stood in front of her, and at least half again as much guarded her back. Each had the same savage eyes, and each held a pistol or wickedly sharp instrument. They stood proudly, siblings defiant against the devastated canvas. "If you want to scare me, it's working," Katie admitted. She was going to kill her mother. Sylvia Shepherd should have known better than to send her good-for-nothing, trouble-attracting daughter on a fool's errand, only to die at the hand of the Lord of the Flies. It was just as much her own fault, Katie had to admit. She had always said yes when it came to her mother. This was why Katie made a personal rule of never speaking to her. God, she was a wimp. Her fear tasted like chalk and gaslight when she swallowed it, and she was glad for the goggles she had squirreled away in the spaceship. She imagined all those bright gray eyes must be burning. She got down on her knees. She had been a child once, and in many ways was a child still. The little girl to her right sniffled and wiped her nose with the palm of the hand that wasn't holding the trembling pitchfork. Katie could see a crooked gash down the side of her tiny face through the sludge there. "Are you all right?" Katie asked. After a moment's hesitation, the pitchfork went clattering to the ground. The girl threw her spindly arms around Katie's neck and sobbed into the dark hair that escaped Katie's flight helmet. The 10-year-old sighed and lowered his weapon. "Never bring a baby to a negotiation," he muttered. "Are we negotiating?" Katie asked. The little girl's matted hair felt like an animal's more than a child's. She patted the girl's back, the shivering bundle of bones and skin in emotion. Poor chicken. Katie knew exactly how she felt. She felt like that too most days. Oh, to have someone else's arms to cry in, to hold you and tell you everything's gonna be just fine, even if fine was a lie. We need a way off this planet, said the leader. But I just got here. Katie's smile was not returned by any of the group. No, wait. The mousy one in the back with the broken glasses had cracked a grin. It gave her hope. Do you know where you are? Sapling, I hope, she answered. Though it's seen better days. There was a giggle behind her. The leader cocked his head. Are you stupid? Oh, yes, said Katie. I do stupid things all the time. I don't even have to try very hard. It's a natural talent. Why are you here? My mother asked for a piece of the tree. There were tiny gasps and sighs and whimpers in response. Even the wriggly girl in her arms went still, apart from the stray shuddering breath and the cacophony of exaggerated sniffles. Katie briefly wondered if her heavy leather corset was as impervious to little girl snot as it was to other forms of corroding acid. Since this is a negotiation, she countered, why are you here? According to the foreclosure beacon, this whole planet's been condemned. The leader managed a scowl worthy of a man 4 times his age, but the voice he spoke with was small and far away. They all left in their fancy ships. Once they were in orbit, they bombed the planet. Those glowing eyes turned hard again. They said they'd come back for us. They lied. It was Katie's turn to gasp. Who? The 10-year-old leveled the hand cannon at her again. The adults. Katie knew better than to surrender or to try and claim she was just like them, however true that might really be. That's the most awful thing I've ever heard, she whispered. Why would anyone do that? Because we're not real people, said the leader. You look real enough to me, said Katie. The grimy bundle of bones shifted in her arms and sniffled again. Katie wrinkled her own nose and wondered if the little girl had ever seen a bath in her lifetime, if any of them had. We're clones, said the dirty keeper of the secret of the world. I know. Katie whispered the words back to the girl. My mother was a clone too. She was born here, just like you. Katie had recognized her mother's eyes in the boy's face, in all their faces. The little girl in her arms might have been her mother in another time, in a parallel life where she was dirty and undernourished and bordering on feral. The kid had been right. Not only were they clones, but they were minors as well. In the current climate, the All-Space Administration would consider their genocide merely the mandatory cessation of a scientific experiment. It was a legislation being fought tooth and nail by powerful men and women all over the universe. Powerful women like her mother. I'm Katie, she said to the girl who was not her mother. What's your name? The girl opened her mouth to respond, but the leader cut her off. We don't have names, he snapped angrily. We have numbers. He yanked at his collar, tearing his shirt open enough for Katie to read the first half of the serial tattooed on the meat of his shoulder. So bitter for one so young. She had been a petulant child and an angsty teenager herself, but Katie couldn't even remember having hated the world so much. This one was so full of bile that his tongue was virtually green. Katie wondered how bitter those nasty words tasted, if he was able to feed off them like fetter moss fed off of air. Katie wondered if he had ever tasted chocolate. Her mother loved chocolate. My mother has a name, Katie said. She calls herself Sylvia. Just because someone didn't give you a name doesn't mean you don't choose one on your own. She raised an eyebrow at the leader. I may be stupid, but I'm not dumb. She started tickling the girl in her arms, thrilling at the mad giggles that echoed in the empty square, bouncing off the ruined buildings. If the children could still laugh, there was hope. The tickle monster has you, and she's not going to let you go until you tell her her name! Piglet! The girl squealed. Katie stopped as quickly as she'd started. Really? She asked. The girl nodded, and Katie looked back up to the leader. There was only one book left after the bombing, he said. We all took our names from that. He reached into his too large leather vest and pulled out a tattered copy of Now We Are Six. My name is Milne, he said. Robin, Rabbit, Pooh, Owl, Christopher. The children all eagerly shouted their names at once, and Katie chuckled. It's an honor to meet you all, she said, and I will tell you right now that I'm not leaving this planet without you. All the children cheered heartily, stomping their feet and waving their weapons in the air. Katy hoped the few with pistols knew enough to have the safeties set. She set Piglet on her feet and stood beside her, still holding her hand. "But first," she said, "my mother asked me to get her a branch from the tree. Can you tell me if it's still alive?" The children sobered. "It was in the area hit hardest by the blast," said Milne. "The bombs triggered earthquakes, and everything just went tumbling down," said the eyeglassed one who called himself Robin. Milne nodded. "The tree might still be alive, and you might be able to get to it, but you won't be able to do it alone." "Will you help me?" Katy asked him. "Do you promise you will not leave us here?" Milne countered. Katy smiled. They were still in negotiation, after all. "I promise. After we get the branch from the tree, we'll all pile into my shuttle and leave this bucket of rocks behind." "All of us?" asked Piglet. Her mother had never been that cute. She had been born hard, dug from saplings' coal mines, melted and cast in the foundries run by her brothers and sisters. She had burned her own cereal tattoo away with the acid used in the textile mill where she worked, and she stowed away on the first ship she could gain access to. And the second. Sometime before the 10th ship, she finally escaped, leaving nothing behind but a planet full of slaves and the memory of a tree that symbolized their very existence. She was 14. It was easier to think that her mother had popped from a core womb without emotions, smart as a whip, and bred for independence. It was harder to think that she had been ticklish and inquisitive, innocent and fragile. Piglet had held that pitchfork just as competently as any other child in the gang. Perhaps it was not too late for her to keep the softness and the laughter. Perhaps she could look forward to a future where she was something other than a warrior. Or if she did, perhaps she could use her voice and her strength for the good of the universe, like her mother. "All of us," Katy said forcefully. She bit back tears. It would do no good to cry in goggles. God, she was a wimp. "I'll go with you," Milton offered, and shrugged on the tattered pack at his feet. "Christopher and Al, gather the rest and have them ready when we return." "The rest?" Katy realized there was a question she'd forgotten to ask. "There are 142, said Milne, counting the babies. Counting the babies. Great. Oh, this was so typically Katy. You'd think she'd be used to this insanity by now. There was no way she'd be fitting 142 anything in her compact shuttle, never mind babies, and she had a sinking suspicion Milne had already done the math. To his credit, he didn't say anything. Katy thanked her muse for small favors, and the one person who could help her with a big favor was the last one she wanted to call. She put that problem on the back burner. For now, she needed to focus on the task at hand. How far away is the tree? You don't know? All right, enough of playing the stupid card. Bonding time was over. Last time I was here, it was a city where you could tell where the land stopped and the sky started. Everything was stark and outlined. Up was up and left was left, and directions made a difference. It was a world for outsiders. This, Katy waved her hand at the miles of rubble and the roiling clouds before her, this is chaos. This is your world, and I'm an alien here. I'm asking you to be my guide. Milne bowed with a flourish and straightened the tie beneath the too large vest and the belt of bullets that crossed over his breast. It's this way. Follow me. Katy was glad she had chosen to wear her sturdiest pair of boots to the surface. She was so used to being in a calm, meditative state when she painted that her body complained after what was probably only a few hundred feet of rubble-strewn terrain. She felt like an ant in the woods. Each step was even more of a challenge than the one before it. There were bridges that used to be doorways, and boulders that used to be walls, and rocks that just used to be rocks, but in a different part of the world. Spiky spires that once topped skyscrapers lay crumpled and bent before them like a discarded giant's toy. They went over and under and around and over. It wasn't so much walking as it was climbing across the ground. So you were here before? Milne asked, and Katy was glad for the distraction. My mother brought me here when I was little. She wanted me to see where she had come from, to understand what a city was, to see the tree, and know how special it was to her. And did you? Understand, I mean. Katy leapt over a 3-foot gap in what used to be a sidewalk. No, at least not the way she wanted me to. She wanted me to see the place that had made her into what she was. She wanted me to know why she was the way she was. Is. Milne held out a hand and pulled her over an all-terrain vehicle that was wedged on its side between two building foundations. What is she? Katie wondered how long she would smell the gasoline on her fingers. Covered as they were now in grime and grease, she wanted to use the blank section of the next standing wall and express without words the answer to Milne's question. But she didn't want to leave the rest of the children alone longer than she had to. True, they had been without someone to care for them long before she arrived, but there was a difference in being alone and being reminded that you were alone. She's a warrior like you, said Katie. She's all no-nonsense and hard edges and will fight to the death for the oppressed. She's fighting for you right now, as a matter of fact. I like her already. Katie thought about that a moment. You would, she said. You're not much like her. In any other setting, Katie would have taken offense to that, but it was the truth. Katie wasn't much like her mother at all. Her mother had been broken because she was strong. Katie broke because she wasn't. And yet they were still both fighting the good fight. Only Katie's efforts were on a much smaller scale. Much, much smaller. Canvas-sized and internal. No, she said, I'm not. But I like you too, said Milne, matter-of-factly. You care. Katie stumbled and laughed as she caught herself. Years of therapy and miles of sailcloth and hundreds of brushes and gallons of paint, and a 10-year-old who had known her for an hour was able to sum up her blessings and curses in just 2 words. You are wise beyond your years, my friend. Did you see the unicorn? When you were here, I mean. Katie stopped at that and sat down on the chunk of roadway she was straddling. When Milne realized she wasn't following, he did an about-face and stretched out on a fallen beam beside her. The silence was so utterly complete it was almost a presence beside them. There were no birds in the sky, no planes or airships, no rockets or shuttles launching, no blast of steam engine or billow of smokestacks. All the soot and ash in the air was all there would ever be, but a city, a world, a life could come crashing down and still survive as long as there was hope. Yeah, I did. The memory had never been far from her heart. It dwelled quietly inside of her, subconsciously keeping her faith alive. Have you? The sapling unicorn was a tale told by children and a legend passed on by adults, until a clever scientist discovered that the harsh mix of chemicals in industrial cities' atmosphere, crossed with the tree's indigenous pollens, combined with the unique makeup of prepubescent clones' DNA, made it possible for children on the planet to hallucinate. Why the manifestation always presented itself in the form of a unicorn was never decided upon, but sociologists thought that in this case the legend begat future sightings, which then reinforced the legends, and so on and so on. Katie, apparently, had been enough like her mother at a basic enough level to have seen it herself that one occasion all those years ago. Odd to think that without that, Katie's sanity might not have survived. No, said Milne. None of us have. None of the ones who were left. Perhaps the tree is dead, then, said Katie. Perhaps. Or perhaps there's simply no hope left in the world. He sounded so serious, so desolate, that Katie didn't have the heart to laugh at him, so she insulted him instead. And here I thought you were smart. She dismounted from her perch and poked him in the chest with 2 fingers. As long as you are here, there is hope. The world is just the world. It always has been and always will be. Granted, it may change. It may blow up around you, or sink beneath you, or swallow you whole, but it's still just a world. Don't give it any more credit than that. If there's no hope, dear Milne, it is because you don't have it. So, have some. Milne smiled back. See? Told you I wasn't stupid. You said you were stupid. You just weren't dumb. Katie hopped over the beam. Maybe I'm neither. Maybe. And he tried to catch her right before she quite ungracefully fell straight into the pit. For all the gas and coal and ash in the air, the dirt that ended up in Katie's big mouth just tasted like plain old dirt. She shook her head, spat it out, and gave up on all semblance of dignity. I found the tree, she called up to him. I'll come down and help you out, he called back. No, she cried. I'll get the branch. See if you can find some rope. It was hard to tell, but judging from his silhouette at the edge of the crater, Katie would have sworn he just rolled his eyes. "I have rope in my pack," he said. "Let me go tie it off to something." And then his shadow disappeared. Katie wondered about the physics of how the tree could still be standing in the middle of an impact crater, but she stopped immediately, as if thinking about it too much might make the universe aware of some logic it had missed and seek to right itself. The smooth alabaster bark of its trunk was unmarred. It stood out as starkly against the landscape as the whites of the cloned children's eyes and teeth. The tree's long, feathery limbs floated back and forth in a non-existent breeze, each long, thin leaf waving her welcome. They skimmed across her dirty cheek with the tender caress of a mother like she had never had. She pulled the serrated knife out of her right boot and snapped off several limbs of good length, carefully wrapping the ends with the oxum tape she had stashed in her belt pouch. She traced the pale lines in the soft wood, softer than her dry and stained hands, far softer than her mother's hard and weathered ones. Invisible sap crept down her fingers, gluing rivers into the grease and grime, and Katie's nostrils flooded with the scent of green, of life so sharp and rich that it brought tears to her eyes. God, she was a wimp. This was what her mother had asked her to come for. Sylvia Shepherd had never seen the unicorn. For her mother, the tree had been, and still was, her hope, her faith. Finally, Katie understood. And while she waited for Milne to return with the rope, she extracted her personal assistant out of one of her many pockets and prayed her e-call would bounce off that errant foreclosure beacon. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Katie. I have a favor to ask you, but first, guess where I am?" She summed up for her mother about the state of sapling, the clone orphans still left on the planet, and her success with the tree. Her mother was amused and outraged all at the same time, and started shouting orders so loudly that Katie had to hold her assistant at arm's length. Sylvia Shepherd, for possibly the first time in her life, with all her power and anger and might, was on her daughter's side. It made Katie so giddy with delight that she quickly tied the cuttings to her belt loop and scrambled up the side of the crater on Milne's rope like she had been doing it her whole life. She skipped and jumped and almost flew over the ruins of the city back to her ship, back to where the collection of noisy, soot-covered children had gathered around it. There beside it in the courtyard was Piglet in her dirty dress, spinning like bits of coal dust on eddies of wind. The city might have been destroyed, but it hadn't stopped the wind from blowing or little girls from dancing. Piglet squealed as Katie snatched her up into her arms so that they could spin together. The branches of the tree brushed against her legs, and the feathery leaves waved in their own dance, surrounding them all in that refreshing scent of rejuvenating, life-giving green. The fever caught the other children, and they all started spinning and dancing and falling down and giggling together. All of them, even the babies. Katie stopped spinning when Mill finally caught up with her. "Will you dance with us, Mill?" she asked, bubbling over with joy. His face was rigid. She'd wondered if that seriousness would wipe clean with the dirt. "I saw the unicorn, Katie." "What?" She set Piglet back down on her feet. Oh, Milne, that's fantastic. Isn't it beautiful? You must keep that memory always. You must hold it in your heart and never forget it. You found your hope, Milne. Don't ever lose it. And if you see him again, thank him for me and tell him I miss him." He motioned for Katie to come closer, and when she leaned down to him, he whispered in her ear, "It's you, Katie. The unicorn is you." At a loss for words, she hugged him then, like a soldier would hug a comrade, like a friend would hug a friend, like a sister would hug a brother. Blazing lights in the dimming sky above announced the descent of more than a dozen shuttles. "I hope you really do like her," Katie said, "because you're about to meet her." "Who?" asked Milne. "Your big sister." She took his hand and joined the rest of the children watching the descending constellation of hope, bright as a unicorn. "I call her Mom."
Hope is hard to define, sometimes hard to find, but it's the thing that keeps us going when all around seems darkest. It's what keeps us looking forward to a brighter day tomorrow. I like Albert Einstein's quote, "Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow." But even better is a quote by Christopher Reeve, the Superman actor who through misfortune became a quadriplegic. He said, "Once you choose hope, anything's possible." Often, your outlook on life is a choice. When facing tough times, you can choose to believe that everything's bad and nothing's going to change. Or choose to believe that things will get better and work toward that end, either alone or with help from those around you. This is something I struggle with myself, and I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing to do. But choosing hope helps change your outlook, your thinking, your life. Cast of Wonders is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license, so you can share this story with as many people as you like, but you aren't allowed to change it or sell it. Join us next time for Tir na Noch by Nathaniel Lee.